Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, joined once again by the one and only G. Edward Griffin. First of all, thank you for joining us again, sir, and how's everything going?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Josh, and everything's going really well. We're approaching Christmas, and the spirit is in the air. I'm rested, and aside from the fact that the world is falling apart, other than that, everything is great.
Well, let's talk about that world that's falling apart for a moment. I wanted to go into something that I think is a concern of many. China is set to replace the United States in the coming years as a global superpower. I prefer no slave racket be a so-called world superpower, but this issue concerns many considering the technocratic approach China takes in keeping their pawns or people on their knees, especially considering things like social credit, artificial intelligence, and facial recognition. Recently, a video went viral of a man being interrogated, chained to a chair for making fun of police on social media. What are your thoughts on a Chinese world order and the threat that is posed to freedom worldwide?
It's a good question. The reason I took a beat there to think about it is that there's definitely a change in focus, in my mind, at least in the last 10 years, certainly in the last few years. The focus is that we're so used to talking about nations like, what about China? And what about the United States? And what about Russia? And, we're used to thinking in terms of, well, how's the dollar doing compared to the yen? And all the nationalistic characteristics are very much a part of our way of thinking. But as time goes by, those lines are getting blurred. And even though we talk about China becoming the dominant superpower, the reality is that China and the US and Russia and Germany and France and Europe, all of Asia, all of Africa are gradually merging into the global superpower. And what happens in China is happening in the United States, except that we're a little bit behind, but we're running like crazy to catch up. The leaders of the American people, unbeknownst mostly to the American people, are drooling over the opportunity and the inevitability, they think, that we will be doing exactly what China is doing in terms of surveillance and social credits and so forth. So when we talk about what about China, we're really talking about what about the United States too. And so that all went through my mind in an instant when you asked that question. And yes, we do know that China wants to be dominant, as any nation or group wants to be dominant in the larger group. China certainly wants to replace the role of the United States as being the dominant, the big dog, the alpha dog, so-called, in the global pack of wolves. So, so having gotten that off my chest, that's my first thought about China versus the United States. It's not really so much versus. It's just they're both following the same path. And the question is, which one is going to get ahead of the other? But they're both traveling the same path, and that they're really not in competition with each other, except to be the winner. But they both expect, and all the other countries too, expect to cross the finish line. So anyway, having said that, I think it's a bad thing. I'm horrified by the way the world is going. And I don't know whether there's any solace in the idea that, well, maybe if we win the race, if we cross the final, the final line, the goal, if we cross the goal first into slavery, wouldn't that be better than if they cross the goal first into slavery and we are second place?
Yeah, it's essentially collectivism versus collectivism, and the winner, no matter which way it goes, isn't us. But I mean, just considering going back, and you make a really good point, going back to the early 1970s, Henry Kissinger meeting with Mao Zedong, and then of course leading into alliance with China and Zbigniew Brzezinski creating the Trilateral Commission. This seems to have been a plan for a very long time, slow but incremental, and very much powerful. So let's connect the dots dots here. Countries like Australia are following China's approach. Big tech monopolies are bowing down to Chinese censorship and utilizing 5G. The cashless society and technocratic superstate grid becomes even more concerning. What are your thoughts on 5G's role in enslaving humanity? Because this all seems to be connected to the Internet of Things, creating some kind of slave racket under the guise of convenience and great new technological marvels.
Yeah, that's a key factor, isn't it, Josh? Because up until recent times, it's been very difficult to control large numbers of people because there are always places that people could go and escape. They could cross national boundaries and get out of one country if necessary and go into another. We certainly saw that when so many of the Jews got out of Germany when they saw what was going to happen. The ones that got out were very happy that they did. The ones that didn't get out and said, well, I'm sure it'll all work out fine. And after all, Germany is my country and so forth, didn't do so well. And we've always had the ability to do that too with money. Well, if the dollar is going down, well, let's buy Deutschmarks or yen or something. Well, now even that is now being merged into one central currency. So the point is, with the advance of technocracy and the improved ability to digitize literally everything and every activity and every quantification and every qualification even, all of a sudden something new has happened on this earth. And that is the ability for a small group of people, relatively small elite, to control the masses of the entire planet. And I mean, it's possible now because of technology. And 5G is at the center of that final stage, or maybe not the final, it's the next stage at least, a major step in being able to digitize everything. We're now calling it fondly the Internet of Things. That sounds so interesting and kind of cute. Internet of Things, oh, isn't that fun? Well, the Internet of Things, of course, as your viewers know, that merely means that every mechanical device that we use in our lives will be hooked up to a grid of data, and everything that piece of equipment does, or every place it's moved to, whatever happens to it will be recorded in some kind of a database, all of which can be used to access everything about us, because we exist today by using things. I mean, right now we're using things. We're using a communication device. We're using cameras and microphones and internet connections. We travel in cars and we make telephone calls and we buy clothes in stores, and those clothes have tickets on them, and soon they're all going to have little chips in them and so forth. And we buy food at the grocery store, and those things, they're working up the plans now to have little chips in every container. Every can of milk, every loaf of bread will have a specific number on it. They'll know who buys it. They'll know where it goes. They'll know how long it takes to consume it. They'll know where the trash was thrown. I mean, it's incredible. I used to laugh at that thinking, oh, sure. But no, it's really happening now. And you can only imagine what it'll be like in 20 years or 50 years.
It's pretty horrifying to think, going back even 10 years, if we told people about this kind of stuff happening, and most of us did, people would say, you're crazy. That sounds absurd. As if they're going to have chips in everything. Of course, they don't have facial recognition cameras on the street that send people tickets for jaywalking to their phone while shaming them on giant billboards like they do in China. Of course, that's absurd. But it's happening, and we're just being vindicated time and time again. And I wanted to ask, because we talked a bit about this competition between two collectivist superpowers, and China is taking over much of Africa, like the IMF has done for so long, loaning more money than these countries can afford to pay back, and then coming in as basically buying up their resources, taking over their state oil, energy companies, etc. And the U.S. has been involved in doing the same thing with many countries in the past. I wanted to ask, with a global collapse on the horizon, integrating the 5G grid, integrating the Internet of Things, integrating the cashless society, a lot of people would say that China, obviously they got a lot of debt too, and they're going to see a collapse of inevitably eventually too. But a lot of people believe that the U.S. is going to fall and China might be able to survive the oncoming global monetary collapse. Do you think that's possible? And could the yuan be the future world reserve currency?
Well, I think it's possible. And I don't know, the word that catches me off guard a little bit is the word fall, that the United States will fall. I think the United States has already fallen in many ways. But I know when you use the word, you mean like when it falls, it hits something hard, and
Yeah.
it's it's sort of splats as well as falls.
Or instead of hitting the ground, it goes through the ground and finds itself in hell or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And so maybe it even bounces a little bit. But so I know what you mean. The United States, I think, is certainly facing the fact that we're coming to the point where maybe it can't fall much further without hitting something really, really, really hard. And that's when, of course, there'll be people on the streets rioting for food, like happens in so many other countries. It's hard to imagine, those of us who have lived in such splendor and affluence in the United States, it's hard to even think of that happening here. That just happens in those other countries where they're not like us. They're not smart like us. But the fact of the matter is, the countries where that happens, in every case, it happens because those countries have followed the collectivist ideology in their social order, and they followed the path of central banking and fiat money in their economic order. And those are exactly the paths that we have been following. In fact, we are really the leaders in both of those. And the only reason I think that we haven't done the splat is because we've been able to pass off the consequences, or much of the consequences of our acts, pass them off onto other countries who are even worse conditioned than we. And so they need our dollars because their monetary units, or whatever they call them, are even worse than ours, and they can't conduct any significant financial transactions, or large financial transactions, in their Zimbabwe dollars, for example. So they are hungry for something like the US dollar. So we are able to pass off our inflation to these countries. And also, as long as we have the strongest military in the world, no other country will dare step too much out of line, lest that we decide to label them as a rogue nation harboring terrorists or something, and decide to invade them and plan regime change for them. So we've been able to sort of bully our way around the world for quite a while. And this is where we get to the real discussion between China and the US. China is anxious to assume the role of the world bully. It's not that they object to the fact that there is a bully. They object to the fact that it's not them. They object that it's us we're bullying the world when they should be the bullies of the world. And that really is, it's a harsh thing to say. And I'm not condemning the Chinese people when I say this. We're talking about governments now. We're talking about the elites in both governments and all governments. The people around the world are the victims. It's not the Chinese versus the Americans or the Germans or that kind of nonsense that they'd like to get us to thinking of. But we're talking about the elites. And when the Chinese elites start talking about building up a gold reserve to back up their money, it's not because they give a hoot about sound money. They just want to make their monetary unit more attractive as a gold reserve a world reserve currency, to displace the US dollar in that role. Once they have that, you can be sure the gold will be taken away. It's just a device, because they don't really care about sound money any more than the elites in this country or any other country care about sound money. You notice the biggest advocates of fiat money are the bankers and some of the politicians in every country, and yet they're the ones that are hoarding the gold. But they just don't want the gold to be connected to the money supply. So anyway, I'm off the track. So what do I think about China becoming the dominant force in the world? I think it's a very real possibility, because mainly I think it's not so much because of the prowess of the Chinese; it's because of the treachery of the American elite. The American elite have for a long time been very hostile to their own country in terms of being the superpower. They talk about it a lot, but I was shocked back in the days when President Kennedy was still president, And I, like everybody else, I thought President Kennedy was the closest thing to sainthood. He was a wonderful president. He spoke well. He was charming. He was charismatic. He was opposed to communism, all the threats of communism. But then I read some quote that he made in a speech, and he said, it's a shame that the world has so much division of economic class. He says, we must in America do everything we can to make sure to redistribute the wealth from America to the rest of the world. He said, we are too rich. We must reduce our affluence. We must not be different from the rest of the world because that's not fair. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody slipped him a book of Das Kapital or Communist Manifesto. And then I found out, of course, that he was a graduate of the London School of Economics, which is this, the main educational global center for all of the elitists who are collectivist in their thinking. So then I realized that, oh my gosh, even President Kennedy had fallen for this. And then I started to look deeper and I realized, well, it wasn't just President Kennedy. It was virtually everybody in positions of political power in Washington, D.C. They used words that most people didn't understand, but when you unscrambled the definitions of what they were saying, they were preaching globalism, all of them. And that meant they said we must bring the rest of the world up and bring the United States down so that we could have more of a level playing field. Well, it's easy to bring a nation down if you just attack it and destroy its functional characteristics, destroy its money, debase its currency, destroy its currency. You can destroy a lot easier than you can build. You can put a match to something, and within a few hours, you've destroyed something that would take, years to build. Building is slow, destroying is quick. And so the name of the game now globally is to destroy the United States, literally destroy it, and rebuild it from the bottom up so that it comes up the same as every other place in the world. Now they finally have a social and economic system, a foundation upon which to build this thing that they like to call the New World Order, where everybody's the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, people aren't meant to understand this. You mentioned they say a lot of things that most people just don't understand. They don't see what they're actually getting at, the climax of their storyline that they're building. I want to note that what you mentioned a bit earlier regarding bullies versus bullies, it's very reminiscent of World War II in a lot of concerning ways, but we're living in a world that's very digitized, very convenient. Tyranny comes under the guise of, convenience all too often. And we see that everywhere, from our phones to our money to, credit cards to, easy to order stuff from Amazon, all of that. And the fact of the matter is that's not going away. It's about how we utilize convenience to overthrow tyranny, because obviously we're not going back, 100 years. We're not going back to all just physical items and, manual and everything being, non-digital. We're going to be dealing with a digital grid one way or another. It's about what are we going to do about it. So I wanted to ask, what is the solution to all of this? Because whether it's the United States or China, they're a bit bigger of a problem than simple community building can fix. So what is the solution to this issue?
I think we cannot answer the question of what is the solution until we're very clear on knowing what is the problem. The problem is not because we've got technological advances, not that we have a digitized world, not because we've got all these convenience factors, but it's because of what we think. It's not what we have, but it's what we think, because what we think is how we'll use those things that we have. And when I say what we think, I mean what we think about how humans should interact with each other. What kind of a social and economic system do we want in order to achieve all of our individual and collective goals to the highest degree possible, to the optimum? There's no such thing as perfection. I don't think anybody or very few people are really the utopians that some of the early socialist and collectivist writers pretended to be in their utopian novels about how wonderful everything would be if we just get rid of those evil people who had wealth. But even in the absence of believing in a utopia, we all have an ideal. And the ideals may vary, but most of us, especially as we get a little bit older, we realize that there will be no perfect world because everything really is kind of a balance between forces equal and opposite to each other. You can't have up without down. You can't have left without right, in without out. And really, you cannot have good without evil. Now we're crossing over there into sort of a different area, but it's a fact that if we didn't know what pain was, it'd be pretty hard to know what pleasure was. It's not just the opposite. Not just the absence of pain. Pleasure is the opposite of pain in a way. So you get almost into a philosophical discussion of, well, what is life all about? And when you get to be older, you think, oh my gosh, it's a mixture of things, and a lot of things are in opposition to each other. Good versus evil, for example, right versus wrong. You can't have one without the other. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because as you get older and you see the world working in front of your eyes for so long, you realize that the perfect thing, the best thing, let's say, it's not the perfect thing, because the perfect thing is that without opposition. But that's not the best, because first of all, it's impossible. So we look for the best possible, and the best possible is where the balance is in our favor, so that the good exceeds the or at least outweighs the evil. And so we come back to the system. What is the best system? What do we think about it? Are we going to make everybody equal? Well, you can't do that without bringing everybody down to the bottom. That's the only place where equality exists, is at the bottom. And so you have to have what we think then, and we have to start thinking about what is the best relationship for people living together in a social, peaceful, tranquil environment. And what is the best economic system for achieving the greatest, highest standard of living with the most freedom of action? And it's not perfect. There will always be some things in it that require abstinence, require exertion, effort. You have to work, for example. You can't just say, well, everybody should be comfortable, everybody should have health care, everybody should have a house or roof over their head, but nobody should have to work for it. And that doesn't go that way. So we have to say, well, what are the conditions that bring the most roofs over our heads and the best food on our plates for the most people? And that is to get coercion out of the equation and let people act in free will. Then true charity comes up instead of forced coercive charity in the form of politics. And so I'm rambling again, as I usually do, but I'm slowly getting to the point that the solution to all our problems is not to choose which type of technology we want or what law to put on the books, or to design a better formula for the creation of money. So we will increase it from 3 to 3.5% or whatever it is. It's not in those technical things. It's in the philosophical things of what we think, how society should be based. And once you get that, once that starts to grow in your mind, it grows quite rapidly. And at least it did in my mind. And I could see that the solutions to all of these problems lay in the understanding of this thing called individualism versus collectivism as a political philosophy. Well, it's an ideology, I guess. It's not really political at all. Politics usually means, one party against another and that kind of thing. But no, this is an ideology. And people of all cultures, all nations, all religions, both genders, all economic strata can agree that individualism is the ultimate optimum form of a social order. I think once they understand the options between individualism and collectivism, for example, then the only thing left is to take a look at that economic structure. And that really is an outgrowth of the philosophical one, because if we really believe that the only reason to use coercion against another human being is in the defense of life, liberty, and property, which is the conclusion I think most of us come to eventually. If we really believe that, then we apply that to the economic world as well. And that means that money cannot exist or should not exist by coercion. And say it more simply, we should all be free to choose whatever we want as money. and keep the government or corporations or any form of coercion out of it. It's a highly individual choice. And then under those conditions, of course, money will always flow, as it always has in history when those conditions existed. Money has always been chosen freely by the people as being something of intrinsic value, something that has value for itself, even if it weren't used for money. And of course, we all know that the most common choices have been gold and silver, but not always. But it's always been something of intrinsic value. So if we apply this philosophy of non-coercion, except for the defense of life, liberty, and property, which is kind of a social construct, and we apply that to the economic world, we come up with the idea that we should have a money which is freely chosen by the people, can be whatever they want, and there should be no coercion to force us to accept one type of money over another. So those two ideas come together when you really understand the principles of individualism. If we can get clear on that, believe it or not, I am convinced that all of these other issues will gradually melt away, not down to zero, but down to such a small number that we would consider this to be nirvana.
And you mentioned something a bit earlier that I can't help but bite on a bit. You mentioned pain, and I just can't help but think about the idea of you can't have a positive without playing against a negative. And I apologize if I'm going into some otherworldly aspect here, but you're good at influencing me to go into these realms. I can't help but think of this notion of what the Gnostic Christians talked about, for example, which is that we're all basically just animals on a farm working for someone else. This idea of spirituality, that we are, what happens here on earth doesn't necessarily matter. It's what happens after and that kind of stuff. I have to ask you, does any of this matter? Does any of this matter? Has there ever been a time when people aren't fighting and aren't arguing and attacking each other and killing each other throughout all of humanity? Does any of this matter? Because I feel like I'm asking myself that a lot, very often, and I'm sure it's come up in your mind throughout your life. What do you think?
Yes, I think most people think about those issues after a while, and most, not all. I know there are some that couldn't care less about it. They're so wrapped up in the material aspects of their lives. Sometimes I envy them because they don't have to worry so much as I do. But mostly I don't envy them at all, because they also don't have to worry, but they also miss out the joy of discovery and analysis and dreaming and reaching for something higher. And I think that's built into most of us. I think we have this innate impulse to answer these questions, Josh, and that's, if it's true that we do have this impulse, most of us, it's there for a reason. It's there for a reason, and I'm convinced that I don't know the reason, and probably never will. I like to tell the story about when I got my first computer. It was a portable computer. It was a compact, and it looked like a portable sewing machine. Had a handle on it and a big case, and it was a luggable, not a portable. It was a luggable, and so you take the lid off and turn it on its side. And you've got this computer with a keyboard, and I put the floppy disks in and everything, and I had the manual. I was reading about this thing called DOS operating system. What is that? So that was this phase I was in. It was on my desk, and I had a dog. His name was Alpha, and he's a lab, a lovely dog, very friendly thing. He always at my feet, making me feel good. And he was looking at me on the computer, and he was tipping his head from side to side, and the computer would go click and whir, and he'd hear it, and he'd look, and he was trying to figure it out. And I remember looking down at him, and I'm saying, Alpha, you're a dumb dog. You'll never figure this out. Look, you can stare at it all you want. I was actually kind of, whimsically talking to him and thinking that even I wasn't understanding it either. And I said, it's just beyond you. So just forget it. Just drop it. Let it go. And then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. In an instant, I saw myself as the dog. I saw myself looking up at the stars and tipping my head and looking at the phenomena in a microscope and looking at the leaves grow and a baby come into a human being. And all of a sudden, in a flash, I saw myself trying to figure out something that I'm so stupid I'll never figure it out. Let it go,
Yeah.
And it made me feel comfortable after that, because I was able to find a certain comfort level in realizing that, okay, I am too dumb. I just don't have it. But nevertheless, it doesn't prevent me from inquiring and want to know more and understand where I fit into this unknowable thing. And once I got that perspective, I felt a lot more comfortable about knowing things. And I don't know why I got off on that. It's because I think the answer to your question is that we have something built into us. It's probably genetic. And if we just relax and let it go and just say, okay, why am I here? All of a sudden we'll know why we're here, because that's what we're compelled to do. We're doing what we are compelled to do if we just let it go and feel it and respond to it. I've heard people say similar things like that. And I've often wondered, who are these strange people? What's the matter with them? But now I feel it too. So I'm part of the strange group now. I think that what do we do about it is just sort of let go and follow our instincts, but do something. And then I want to close on this one, because it's so easy to say, well, we don't get it, so don't worry about it. It makes no difference. And I think that was your question. What difference does it make? It makes a difference if we worry about it. It makes a difference if we think about it and we feel that there's an injustice that needs to be righted.
Right.
Then it makes a difference. And I think the reason we respond to these instincts of justice or injustice is because we're supposed to. That's probably why we're here. That probably is because whether we know it or not, if we understand it or not, we have been put into the existence to be one of those opposing forces. Hopefully we're on the side of right, and we're here to oppose those who have been put here on the side of wrong. Maybe that's an oversimplification, no doubt. But whatever it is, we have that purpose. And by golly, we better not ignore it, or we're going to go through life miserable, and we're going to wind up on our deathbed and say to the ceiling, why was I here? What did I do? Did it make any difference?
Yeah, I think we'll get the answer at the end anyway. But I mean, going into the mysteries of life, I find that the mystery itself tends to be one of the points, the purpose, that we're searching for the mystery. We might not find the answer to the mystery, but that's one of the great things about life, is searching for those answers to those mysteries. Going into something that's not as ridiculously or absurdly macro, I wanted to ask you about, just with things happening, popular trends regarding, Jeffrey Epstein. One of the top trends in the world right now is Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. All these powerful people have been, getting caught up in the controversy. A lot of crazy things seem to be happening on the positive end of things. And I have to ask, in your life, you've been working at this for quite some time now. Have you ever seen people waking up at the rate they are? I mean, even with things like memes online, seriously changing generations. I don't understand it myself, but do you see people waking up at a faster rate today than you saw in the past?
Yes. The short answer is yes. But as usual, I never stop at the short answer, because immediately the instant I thought that the answer was yes, the word "but" came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the but part was that people are waking up to a lot of things that are very wrong. But that doesn't mean they understand them. But they may come to conclusions that the cause of these things is something not correct. And the rest of that but is they may start turning to the same elites to solve the problem that created the problem. How do I explain what that really means? Let's just take the economic world. We see the dollar under greater stress than ever before, and more people are saying this can't go on. This is absurd. Even the pundits. I mean, even the micromanagers who are sort of in line with the establishment most of the time are beginning to sort of move toward the edge and say, maybe we want to jump off of this thing. This is not going to go well. But they turn around and say, let's have more government control over this, right? let's have more laws. I mean, we got to do something about this. So let's do more of the same that caused it in the first place. That's the but part.
Well, it's very interesting. I can't help but notice that, we could say but about the 60s as well. Like in the 1960s, there's a vast awakening, but also it was very much in the direction of communism, which we've seen later on down the line. And obviously that didn't go in the proper direction. And honestly, time and time again, we see people looking for collectivism or government to save them from the problems of collectivism and government, which is all too common because most people aren't leaders. Most people are followers, just statistically speaking, and they would prefer or be comfortable with someone else leading them. But I can't help but notice that we are seeing a vast amount of people waking up to the craziness of the mainstream media, to the craziness of people like Epstein and his involvement in the royal family, and mass pedophile rings regarding the most powerful people, like we saw with like the Franklin cover-up and Jimmy Savile and all that. I feel like there's some kind of awakening happen. More people than ever think 9/11 was an inside job. YouTube's cracking down on people for daring to talk about it because I think the establishment is afraid. So I think that there is an upside to that, but there always should be a but to that because you never know which way or which direction this might go in. People tend to be quite cyclical. But finishing this off, Mr. Griffin, I want to ask about the Red Pill Expo and Red Pill University. I want to ask you where people can find information on the Red Pill Expo, Red Pill University. I know these are great, amazing projects. You had the Red Pill Expo twice in 2019. Going into the next decade, I think we're going to see movements grow. I think we're going to see momentum behind things like the Red Pill Expo and Red Pill University grow. Where can people find more information on those subjects and, support the work that you do?
Well, thanks for asking that one, Josh. Yeah, I'm really excited about the advances that this concept has made. The concept meaning what we used to call the Red Pill Project. The goal is how do we reach more people? Not everybody is willing to sit around and talk about what's the meaning of life. Are there opposing forces for ethics and so forth? But most people are concerned about the mysteries of the hidden, the especially the fact that we're being lied to about some things, and usually those some things are the most important things in our lives. Nobody likes to be taken for a fool. Nobody likes to be lied to, and they especially don't like it when their own leaders are lying to them. So we decided to use the red pill theme as a means of bringing up some of these topics in a more friendly way, or in a less preaching way, because we really don't like the role of being preachers. We like preferably to be the role of being guides and help people discover things, not to tell them what to do, but just to discover the way things really are. In my opinion, and those of our friends who are involved in this work all agree that if we really understand the reality of life, if we really are not fooled by other people who want to deceive us, we can figure out the right thing to do. So it's really it's a battle for information more than anything else. So with that in mind, we decided to use the red pill meme, and we put on this Red Pill Expo, as you know, back in Bozeman, Montana, which is our first one back in 2017. And it was really a smashing success. And we've had 4 of them now. We're working on our 5th one. And the idea is to bring in experts in their respective fields, mostly professionals, teachers, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, but sometimes just somebody, a housewife who has had a good education and a spark for research that goes in and discovers something that nobody else got hold of before. These people come to our stage and tell us expose the reality behind certain illusions. We're talking about 5G a little while ago. That's a red pill. Most people are taking the blue pill on that one. They think that 5G is all about just getting movies downloaded faster. And isn't it going to be wonderful if we can monitor our home from anywhere in the world and be, also, isn't it wonderful that we can have our cars wired up so that if we have an accident, the authorities will know exactly where we are and they can come and rescue us, things like that. So they're being exposed only to one side. You talk about, opposing views on or forces on things. 5G is definitely one of those areas where there are the good and the bad, and we're just being exposed to the one side. How wonderful it's going to be. So now at the Red Pill Expo, we have presenters, scientific people who've been involved in the creation of the technology behind 5G. We've got doctors, we've got law enforcement people who are telling us the other side of the 5G phenomenon. And so that's what the Red Pill Expo is all about in the field of healthcare and politics and environment, all the important things in our lives. So having said all that we've just decided where the next one's going to be. And of course, the folks who are familiar with my work are familiar with my book called The Creature From Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve. Well, the next expo is going to be on Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island is off the coast of Georgia. It's a real island. It's a real place. It happens to be where the Federal Reserve system was created in a highly secret meeting that took place back in 1910. So when we go to Jekyll Island now in June 4th and 5th, we're going to return to the scene of the crime. And it's quite an interesting place. I've been there a couple of times. You can see the cottages that they were called in those days, which were the or the winter vacation homes, I should say, of the very wealthy elite, the Morgans and the Rockefellers and people like that, who lived in or around New York, and they wanted to get away from the cold climates in the wintertime. So they went down to Georgia, and they owned this island, Jekyll Island, in those days. They built all these mansions, they called cottages. They had a clubhouse, which is still there, and that's where we're going to have our meeting. So it'll be a wonderful place, and so mark your calendar. If you want to get on our mailing list, the best way to do that right now is to, golly, I should have a better, I'll just say sign up for our free newsletter, which is needtoknow.news. Just go to that, needtoknow.news, and there's a place to sign up for a free subscription to that. Once you're on that mailing list, then you'll get all the notices that will be coming out regarding the Red Pill Expo.
I highly recommend it. This is going to be fun, and of course, being at the scene of the crime, we come up with the solutions that the problems might have been caused there, but we can come up with the solutions, and it will be quite the poetic bit of irony to come up with solutions at the site of Jekyll Island. So anyway, I really appreciate you joining us today, Mr. Griffin. Always fascinating to hear your insights on all of these issues, and we hope to talk with you again soon.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Josh, and I know I'll see you at the Red Pill Expo. So in the meantime, thanks again, and goodbye to everybody.
Absolutely. Check those links below. Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, Wham! Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We cannot do it without you guys. Every donation is extremely, extremely appreciated as we're getting incredibly shadow banned. We've lost 80% of our audience since January of 2019 and counting. They are ripping us apart here on YouTube, and the only thing we could do in the meantime as we prepare for the next big step is to ask for help from the viewers that support our free information that we try to post on a daily basis. You can also find us on Subscribestar, where just $1 a month, that's all it takes, $1 a month is all it takes to truly make a huge difference. If everyone gave $1 a month, it would change everything for independent media, and we could win this information war, and we can defeat the mainstream medias eventually. And of course, on Subscribestar, we post subscriber-only content that you'll only see on Subscribestar. So make sure to pledge there, become a patron. That makes a huge difference, guys. And also, don't forget to check out our Bitcoin address below in the comments and description, as well as on the screen for you to scan, if you please. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on the alternatives. We will likely be deleted by YouTube in the next 2 years. It's already happening on a vast scale, so make sure to find us on float.app. That's flote.app. at Josh Sigurdson, as well as at Wham, W-A-M. Float.app is replacing every social media, and I mean, it's just incredible the opportunities it provides for not just creators, but for the average person who wants to get away from these nannies telling them what they can or cannot see. They plan to replace Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Tumblr, Reddit, and Patreon. You could subscribe to us on Float and pledge with cryptocurrency. It's really innovative. We are also on BitChute at World Alternative Media, as well as so many others, Minds, PocketNet. You can find us at World Alternative Media on Instagram. There's many options. And finally, don't forget to join us at Anarchapulco 2020, the famous event, the best liberty event known to mankind, other than perhaps Anarcho Vegas 2020. There are two major events coming up that we are extremely excited about, and you can use promo code WHAM, that's W-A-M, and save 10% on your tickets to these legendary conferences. There's so many amazing people speaking there. You won't want to miss it. So make sure to support in any way you can, even if it's just sharing our videos, pressing like, pressing to be notified. Anything helps, folks. You are the change you wish to see. Thanks for watching, everyone. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.